Good afternoon, everybody. It's John Fernal again. I'm going to do another Media Monday today, since it is Monday. It's been a couple of weeks since I've done one of these. And today I'm going to focus on, again, I'll use my air quotes, truth, right, and news. Bias will probably come into it too. I will also admit that a lot of this stuff that I'm about to talk about, it comes up in the other videos. Some of it will be repetition, so if you've watched any of those, you may have already heard some of this stuff. But I think it's important to talk about today. I'll also mention that the light's a little strange out here today. It's a beautiful summery day here in southern Ontario, so I'm not going to complain, but hopefully the lighting is not too harsh like it is on my shirt here. Anyway, this started for me about 2 weeks ago, I guess, when the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing happened, and I got into a bit of a debate with some people online, of course, who were saying that his firing was justified because he lied, and that's against the law. And what I tried to explain to people was actually that no, it's not. There are broadcast rules. Usually the regulations are kind of regulated. The industry regulates itself, which again is questionable. There is the FCC in the States. There's the CRTC in Canada. They usually are more responsive to things. So what I mean by that is if someone complains, then they will investigate. And yes, there have been fines in the past. The famous, Janet Jackson Nipplegate was one of the most famous ones, where I think they, whatever network it was fined something like $750,000, which again is probably peanuts. But anyway, so in that discussion with this gentleman, he pulled out this page from an FCC thing in which he said, well, here it is. This is, talking specifically about lying. But what he failed to mention, and right away, when you looked at it, it said right at the top, it was labeled broadcast hoaxes. And I said to him that this is likely, I don't know everything, in these regulations. I understand them a little bit. But I said that to me, it sounds like what this was trying to protect was things like the famous War of the Worlds radio broadcast, right? Where something is presented as real news, when it's not. And actually, the more I read, the more I found out that yes, in fact, it was the regulation was created because of some April Fool's jokes that radio stations did that convinced people, right? The famous story of the War of the Worlds one is that, people in some cases were packing up their stuff and moving into the woods because they were afraid of all these attacks. I don't know, again, how truthful that is. Some of these stories get exaggerated. But we know that happened. So I pointed this out to the gentleman. He continued to say, oh, no, I'm wrong. I provided some more proof of what I said, and then he deleted his post, which, again, I find very strange. When you're in these discussions, why not admit you're wrong if you're wrong? But that brought me to this idea of how news is not obligated to tell the truth. In fact, when there's lots of talk again today about news and who controls it. Is it the government? There's lots of people in Canada who think that the CBC is a state-controlled media. I would call it state-funded, but even there, CBC TV has ads. And again, the truth is that really who controls what gets on TV is us in many ways, because it's all based on ratings. As I used to say to my class, there's only one purpose that commercial news has, and it's the same purpose that all commercial shows have, which is that's to deliver eyeballs to advertisers, right? If they don't bring in enough viewers, the show will get canceled. And of course, how much they can charge advertisers is based on, used to be the sweeps. I think they still do the sweeps, but I'm sure it's done very differently today. The shows that get top rated can charge the most. And that's the way it works for news as well. News is no different. They are looking for the biggest reaction they can get. So they make those choices based on that. It's interesting because one of the first times this was introduced to me, I went to a media conference in, I think, about 2000, one of the biggest media conferences ever, probably, media literacy, that is. I don't think there's been another one since. And at that conference, I happened to sit in on a little dialogue with a guy who started Pop-Up Video. So if you don't know Pop-Up Video, again, I know I'm dating myself here. Pop-Up Video was a television show during the time of MTV when it was at its peak and Much Music in Canada. They would show music videos. Of course, that was how most people heard their music, saw their music. And pop-up video was this idea where this guy said, okay, I'm going to take the video format, I'm going to show the video, but then I'm going to have these little pop-up balloons. And the balloons would come up and they'd basically reveal some of the backstage stuff. I mean, I remember one about Madonna. It was a Madonna video, and it talked about, it pops up and says about how she had just blown up at the crew because of this or that. I liked it partly because I like things that show behind the scenes, right? How things actually go, not the version of reality that we're shown, but what went into making that version of reality. Anyway, he was talking. I think his name was Tad. It was a weird name. I remember that. And he told this interesting story about. He said, I sold pop-up video to VH1, I think, and one day he turned the TV on. This was after the sale, and he said suddenly he saw a Lexus ad, and the Lexus ad had basically stolen his idea. Right? They were making the Lexus car would drive down the road, and there'd be these little pop-up balloons that would come up and tell more about the Lexus. And he was like, hey, they can't do that. So he got on the phone, or I guess probably at the time, phoned VH1 and said, hey, look, Lexus is ripping us off, right? We need to do something about this. We need to get the lawyers involved because that's our property. And the response he got was, well, Lexus pays a lot to advertise on our station, a lot. And we don't really want to hurt that relationship. So we're just going to let it slide, right? And that was a moment kind of for me where it clicked and I went, oh yeah, that's who really has the power, right? The advertisers, the ones who spend a lot of money on the station are the ones who are really deciding what it is that we get to see. Some people say to me, why don't we have more good news? Well, the truth is that good news doesn't do nearly as well as more divisive news, right? We know that. If you've never watched Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine, there's a great section in there where he interviews the producer of Cops, and he says that very thing. He says, that being nice to people doesn't do well. It's that drama, right? When you're chasing someone down the street, when there's that moment, that's what people want to see. I mean, the O.J. Simpson famous slow chase is probably where that all started. And so it kind of hit me that, the advertisers are the ones that have the power and make the decisions. And so, as I was going to say, the good news, there was actually a good news program. That's all it covered was good news. I think it lasted about a month or two because nobody watched it. And of course, if nobody watches it, shows get canceled. That's the nature of media. It works a little bit different today, of course, because now we're talking about social media. But now it's, we've gone from number of viewers to number of reactions. You don't get enough reactions, you don't have enough followers, then you're not going to have the same, you're not going to make the same money that, of course, other people do. There's also a great video, and I'm going to put the version of this, the little clip of it, in the comments if you want to actually watch it. And if you're going to watch it, maybe you don't want to listen to this because I'm going to tell the story really quickly. But a great documentary called The Corporation. There's also a second version of it now, which I haven't watched yet. And in The Corporation, there's a section called Unsettling Accounts. And it's quite interesting because it's early days of Fox News, investigative journalism show. And they decide they want to go after Monsanto, right? Monsanto, which is a big mega corporation in the States. And they've put out this drug for, I think it's for cows to increase milk production. But there are all kinds of problems. And in fact, at the time, in Canada, it was banned, but not in the States. So they wanted to write this story, and in the video they talk about how the two journalists start investigating it. They start doing their research. They have the story all ready to go, and then the producer comes in, and he's like, Monsanto advertises a lot on our station, spends a lot of money here. Maybe we could not do this story. And the journalists, to their credit, say, no, this is an important story. We need people to hear it. And so, knowing that, they can't simply tell these guys what to do, the producer starts asking for rewrites. And then he, asks for them to remove certain terms. Don't use the word cancer, all right? Anyway, long story short, in the end, they don't run the story, and the journalists sue Fox News. Of course, it goes through the courts, takes a long time. Finally, they win, right? Fox News is told that you were wrong to do this. However, as a little coda to the story at the very end, they say, well, and actually this went out on Fox News as well. They reported this, that they were vindicated, of course, because when it went to another superior court, they turned it down and said no. But the reason they said that what they did wasn't wrong was because it's not against the law to falsify news. So they were whistleblowers. That's how they kind of got their status. But the whole whistleblower idea is you can only be a whistleblower if something illegal is happening. Well, in this case, the court said it's not illegal to falsify news, right? So and that's an important thing to remember, because there are a lot of people out there who seem to think that if it's news, it's true, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that journalists do not have integrity. I'm not saying that they are trying to tell true stories, right? I'm not going to, use. Well, I guess if we're going to use the term fake news, as President Trump likes to use, then I would also say it needs to apply to the news that he supports or that he likes. But yeah, so I'm not suggesting that when they tell stories that they go out and falsify them, but I am suggesting that the corporations, the advertisers, have a lot more say than most people think. A story that is going to paint an advertiser negatively is not going to get on the air, right? That's important to remember, because really that's what we're talking about with this whole Kimmel thing. President Trump seems to be trying to influence what gets reported, right? That's not what news is supposed to do. News is not just supposed to report the positive about President Trump. They're supposed to challenge him, which brings me kind of to the last idea, which is there is this sense. There seem to be a number of Canadians who believe that our CBC, and in fact all of our media, is government controlled, because it is government supports it. Certainly the CBC. I don't know the numbers when it comes to things like CTV and Global. My guess is that advertisers, they make a lot more money from advertising than they get from the government. But there's a difference between state-controlled and state-funded, right? State-funded is what our CBC is to some degree. Like I said, CBC TV has commercials on it, so it's kind of a mix. But when it's state-funded, the idea is that it's at an arm's length, right? And therefore, they're not just reporting what the government wants them to report. State-controlled, which we often associate with places like North Korea and Russia, is where the government actually dictates what gets told. That's kind of where it seems like the American system is headed, right? That's a very different thing. And the irony is the people who are complaining about CBC being state-funded seem to think it's okay that Trump is insisting that, the news, not even the news, Jimmy Kimmel isn't news, he's entertainment, should report on him in a nicer way. I don't know. I don't get it, to be honest with you. But like I said, I just wanted to talk today a little bit about that idea of truth, what news is about. So keep that in mind. Anytime there are commercials tied to things, and that's most of our media, certainly American media, a little bit less in Canada, it's the advertisers who dictate. Again, it's not like somebody's standing there saying, but there's this pressure, right? There's always this pressure to please the advertisers. And if a network, a station, knows that Corporation X buys $10 million worth of advertising that year, it's very unlikely that they are going to cover a story that is going to make that company look bad. All right. Happy Monday. Hope life is treating you well. It's beautiful here. See you next time.